So joining me now is constitutional lawyer and co-founder of the Alberta Prosperity Project, Jeffrey Rath. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the show. Big news from our friends at the APP over the last week or so. But before I get into what you're up to these days, give us a little bit about who and what you are. If people are just meeting you for the first time, I know you've had some great accomplishments over the last little bit. So tell us about those.
Yeah, sure. I'm a constitutional lawyer, which is just a fancy way for saying that I sue governments for a living. So I spent 34 years suing the government of Canada, suing the government of Alberta, government of Manitoba, government of the Northwest Territories, government of British Columbia, on behalf of citizens in those jurisdictions, Ontario, citizens in those jurisdictions whose rights have been violated by those governments. So, it was unsurprising then, given my skill set, that I would be involved during the pandemic, suing the Alberta government and the communists in Jason Kenney's cabinet, who thought it was appropriate to tell Albertans how many friends they were allowed to have, to shut down our high schools while leaving the bars, casinos, and strip clubs open. So our 18-year-old kids couldn't go to school, but they could go to the bars, casinos, and strip clubs. I guess this is Jason Kenney's idea of higher education or grooming. I'm not sure which, but, something along those lines. But anyway, that's kind of who I am and what I am. I succeeded actually in having every single order issued by Dina Hinshaw and Jason Kenney through the currency of the pandemic in Alberta declared ultra vires or illegal. So now we're undertaking two massive class action lawsuits on the basis of all the illegal orders that were issued by the Kenney government on behalf of all the Alberta business owners that were illegally shut down during COVID, and then on behalf of all of the poor people that were horribly vaccine injured because all choices were taken away from them with regard to vaccines. Dina Hinshaw, Teresa Tam, Bonnie Henry, and others, and their committee of public safety basically getting together weekly to figure out how they were going to lie to Canadians, about this quote unquote, how safe and effective the vaccines were, while hiding and lying about any real scientific evidence that demonstrated that the vaccines were neither safe or effective and should not have been rolled out in the way they were, especially to pregnant women and children, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's kind of, in a nutshell, who I am, what I've been doing for the last 34 years of my life. And now I'm involved with the Alberta Prosperity Project, and we just finalized something we're very, very proud of. This is a fully costed fiscal plan for an independent Alberta called the Value of Freedom, right? This is, I think the one I'm holding up is an earlier draft. This is probably a Mark 2.0 version now that I look at the title. But it's still the value of freedom. And what the fully costed plan demonstrates on the basis of public source documents, Statistics Canada, Fraser Institute, Government of Alberta, Government of Canada, et cetera, is that after independence, after fully costing and paying for an Alberta military at 3% of GDP with $1.5 billion in startup costs, Department of External Affairs, Department of Immigration, and most importantly, deportation, a Department of Customs and Border Patrol, all those types of things, airports, navigation, tripling the spend on Indigenous people in the province of Alberta through constitutionalized resource revenue sharing to lift the Indigenous people of Alberta out of the poverty that Canada has left them in for 150 years. After paying for all of that, the fiscal plan that we published demonstrates that we're going to have between approximately a $30 to $50 billion a year annual fiscal capacity surplus, which could be applied to 30 to 50% tax cuts in year one. So we're very excited about it. The other thing that I wanted to note for people to go, oh, this is all pie in the sky and these numbers are ridiculous and things can't be that good. This is too good to be true, all that nonsense. The funniest thing about this document, when we published it on the basis of last year's Alberta budget numbers, which showed a $6.5 billion deficit. So this year, they posted an $8.5 billion surplus. So if we'd waited a week before publishing the document, the fiscal capacity surplus of Alberta would have actually been $15 billion higher than is indicated in the plan that we published. So obviously, we're very excited about this document. I'm urging everybody that's interested in Alberta freedom and the value of freedom to go to albertaprosperity.project.com and download the document. We have a copy of it available free online. And then we're actually also selling hard copies of these documents at APP events to help defray the printing costs and for fundraising purposes. And copies will be available for sale at APP events around the province very soon. We just have to. We sold out the last time. I took several boxes of them into a 600-person APP event in Airdrie, and we sold out in about 5 minutes. So anyway, we're very excited about this. Everybody that reads it is very excited about this. I gave a presentation on this to a United Conservative Party of Alberta town hall called The Courage to Listen. And the president of the party was there, the chief financial officer of the party was there, and several MLAs were there, constituency association presidents, members of the party had packed this hall out in Calgary. And one of the things that I said was that after reading this document and understanding how much better off Alberta is going to be after independence, I declared on the basis of the standard of a fiduciary at Canadian law, which is that of a reasonably prudent person of business managing their own affairs. That's the test of Canadian law, that any elected MLA or cabinet minister or premier that does not embrace this plan and start pursuing Alberta independence on the basis of an almost immediate $30 to $50 billion a year fiscal capacity surplus is violating their fiduciary obligations to the Alberta voters. And I want all of them to listen to that. And I want Danielle Smith to internalize the fact that the day for all of the Team Canada pom-pom cheering stuff is over, and that unless she embraces Alberta independence on the basis of a fully costed fiscal plan for a sovereign and independent Alberta, that she's violating her fiduciary obligations to the voters that elected her.
It's funny to see the people on the other side say, well, you could never do this. You haven't thought of everything. But I feel like that's APP's role in all of this, is to actually think of everything and then think of the answers. Corey Morgan has been great on this issue too, where, he says, for people who misunderstand, Indigenous people don't have a veto over whether or not this province can stay or go. They have a vote just like the rest of us. And we will need to think about what to do with Indigenous reserves. And APP has said, we'll increase your funding threefold. Now tell us why you should stay in Canada, which doesn't provide you clean drinking water.
Yeah, well, and that's my message for the chiefs of Alberta is I don't understand, other than, all of the lawyers and consultants around them. And believe me, I still work for First Nations, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Northwest Territories, etc., and First Nations people. I understand who some of these consultants or lawyers are in and around them that are horrified by this plan. And by and large, these lawyers are all left-wing, NDP adjacent or NDP affiliated lawyers. Like Orlo, Kelly, and who's another one? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't need to start naming them all. But these lawyers, like some of them were involved in actually bringing applications on behalf of the Alberta unions to remask our children, right? If you can imagine that, when Jason Kenney said, okay, we're done with all of this foolishness, pandemic's over, everybody's free to go, whatever. Some of these lawyers that are representing Indigenous communities and screaming and yelling about how horrible Alberta independence will be, literally were bringing applications in court to remask our children, right? Yeah. So, this is the type of people that we're talking about that are giving advice to the chiefs about how horrible independence is going to be. So, of course, my question for the chiefs is, what part of, continuing to send $15 billion a year to Quebec as opposed to keeping that money in Alberta to help lift your people out of poverty is such a horrible thing? We're literally talking about constitutionalized resource revenue sharing, which is something that I know that the chiefs and councils of Alberta have been demanding for years. that can be fully costed, fully constitutionalized, built into a plan for a fiscal for a free Alberta, where communities are take part in the wealth of this province, where they are literally being provided a share of the wealth that comes from their lands on a going forward basis. I mean, I'm looking forward to having a debate with Mr. Nenshi. It's like, Mr. Nenshi, why are you so against Alberta independence? Do you hate Indigenous people? Are you a racist? Seriously, that's what it comes down to. I mean, the people that oppose Alberta independence and the fiscal capacity that this creates, as far as I'm concerned, must hate Indigenous people in Alberta because they don't want them to succeed, and they don't want them to be financially independent.
Yeah, they're the same
it's a really interesting dichotomy if you think about it.
For sure.
They'd rather give that money to Quebec. They want $15 billion a year to go to Quebec, and they don't want any of that money coming back to Alberta for Alberta's Indigenous people. What does that tell you about them?
Right. And these are the exact same people who will agree with the statements of our prior prime minister, who accused Canada of being some sort of genocidal state, now still insisting that our Indigenous people stay within the framework of the Laurentian genocidal state. It's incongruous in thought.
It's completely incongruous. I mean, I've been fighting the government of Canada on behalf of Indigenous people my entire career as a lawyer. I mean, I've won decisions at the Supreme Court of Canada, including the Mikisew Cree decision, which was one of the most far-reaching treaty rights decisions in the history of Canada. In fact, Nigel Banks, a law professor at the University of Calgary, has described the Mikisew case that I won 9-0 as lead counsel at the Supreme Court of Canada as being one of the most important treaty and Aboriginal rights cases since the St. Catherine's Millings decision in the 19th century. So I didn't wake up one morning and go, oh, wow, I'm going to, all of a sudden decide that I'm going to undo my life's work, right? The reason that I am doing this is that I firmly believe that an independent Alberta that recognizes the sovereignty and independence of Alberta's Indigenous nations and getting them out from underneath the paternalism of the entire, the Indian Act, Indian Affairs structure. They can change its name, but they haven't changed its function. Basically the federal government exists to limit the number of First Nations people in this country through control of the Indian Register, and which is a form of legislative genocide, and B, basically wants to manage them to death by not fulfilling all of the promises that they made in the treaties as treaty promises. So, I don't understand why there should be any great love between the Indigenous people of Alberta and the federal government, who's been screwing them over and over and over and over again, for over a century.
Yeah.
That's probably all we need to say on that subject this morning. But there's a lot of other things to talk about. But I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to talk about that.
For sure. It's such a huge issue. And it's the one thing that the other side loves to hammer on is Indigenous people. And, when I speak to my friend Robbie Picard from Oil Sands Strong, who does so much work with Indigenous oil and gas, the $500 billion worth of blocked and canceled projects, many of them are right in Indigenous communities where Indigenous people would have employment in their own community. And those are being blocked by the paternalist gatekeepers, to use a Polyev word.
Well, or by terrorists funded by, left-wing organizations out of the United States or wherever. I mean, let's look at, that attack on that pipeline camp right in and around the time of the Freedom Convoy. I mean, they declared the Emergencies Act, over a bunch of peaceful protesters. But, everybody needs to know JTF2 was in part established to provide, that Joint Task Force 2, or counterterrorism unit, was established to provide rapid response to acts of industrial sabotage against national projects. That pipeline was a national project. Do you think Trudeau deployed JTF2 to track down the 80 or so people that were involved in destroying that pipeline camp? Of course not. He's more interested in trampling little old ladies, little old Indigenous ladies with horses in the streets because they dared to come to Ottawa to embarrass him over his foolish policies.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's, when you talk about Alberta independence, I mean, that's what's fueling this for a lot of us, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody says, oh, we have to be nostalgic for Canada. Don't you love Canada? Oh, Canada, blah, blah, blah. it's like Canada ceased being Canada the day that Trudeau declared war on us by invoking the Emergencies Act, simply because he didn't want to hear the voices of people that disagreed with him.
After discussing with Cabinet and caucus, after consultation with premiers from all provinces and territories, after speaking with opposition leaders, the federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations.
Right? So, there's nothing for me to be nostalgic about Canada for. And as far as I'm concerned, the only way forward and the only way to save Canada and the only way to actually reopen the Canadian Constitution, and keep in mind, I've been a constitutional lawyer for 34 years, is effectively to pull out one of the Jenga blocks, that is, the Jenga tower of Canada, in this case, Alberta, to reopen the Canadian Constitution. We'll be doing the rest of the country a huge favor by taking Alberta out of Canada. There's no doubt about it, because then they're going to have to, look at the whole Constitution again.
Help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. Members get instant access to all of our shows, invitations to exclusive events, and access to our premium content like live event footage and documentaries you won't see anywhere else. Only Rebel News Plus members can join the conversation by participating in the comments section of our new website. That way you can have your say too. More than anything, though, you'll be able to take pride in supporting real, honest journalism, and you'll help our talented team continue to do the work to push back on the establishment. We really can use your help. We need it, in fact. So thank you, and enjoy Rebel News Plus.